Welcome everybody, and welcome online. Let me just do a sound check. Think it's all good. All right, excellent. Lovely day out today. Thank you guys all for coming here in person. Welcome everybody you online as well. Tonight we have a treat, I guess, because I'm going to do a pun. We're talking about sustainable food systems. We have two folks here today, which we'll introduce in a little bit. Maureen Timmons, she's head of dining services in our business office. She's done amazing stuff here in the at the university. You can talk more about what she has been doing, what her plans are, and as well as Professor Christopher Bosso, who's actually on sabbatical this year, but he's wanted to come in here and make sure he's talking everything to you about what his work over in public policy around food systems. So without further ado, we like to do in this class, we like to have students who are registered for the class come in and present on the topic. Just something that an article they found relevant to another university. And it's a good way to get people engaged and hear what's going on around the rest of the country. So without further ado, you guys want to come up? Was it Harry, Andrea, and Ho-Cheng? You guys, you could stand right around here because the video is up there. So thank you very much.
Hello everyone. So I'm Ho-Cheng.
I'm Maureen.
Andrea.
So today we're gonna talk to you guys about sustainability and resilience involved in dining halls. So just some fun facts out there. 20% of the fresh water used by the U.S. agriculture industry is used to grow food that is never consumed in the U.S. Food waste accounts for 2.6% of all greenhouse gas emissions annually. 90% of all U.S. power plant is used to produce food that is never consumed. And finally, food waste accounts for 21% of the landfill content in the U.S. Just some straight facts about food sustainability, and you can see how much space there is for improvement.
So getting into the article that we chose, it was about how Allegheny campus was the first college in the state of Pennsylvania to go carbon neutral and the 8th in the nation. So they did this through a 3-step plan. The first one was through efficiency retrofit. Basically what this means is that all the previous equipment was upgraded or removed and updated with more efficient and sustainable equipment. So like I said, it's a first of 3 steps. So getting into the steps 2 and 3, step 2 was decarbonization of energy sources, shifting from fossil fuels to any alternative energy source. And they're focusing on being environmentally friendly. And they were close to being fully carbon neutral at this point, but to eliminate the rest of the carbon emissions, they had to invest in sustainability efforts. So putting the money into certain environmentally friendly projects and outputs really is what pushed them over the edge, and they became fully carbon neutral.
Another sustainable project they had around campus was the Car Hall Garden. Here they planted fruits and vegetables. It was made by students in a club with the help of professors. And so plants can be pollinated by certain insects and can be eaten by smaller animals. So chipmunks, squirrels, and even bears. And by implementing this food garden into campus, the students were able to learn more about agriculture, but also get to experience it firsthand. Some other benefits that this brought was community resilience, sustainability efforts, so that students that were interested in the university could see them and were more interested about it, and research opportunities for their undergrad and grad students. And this is important to note that the yield will take some time, but they ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Questions?
Which college is that?
Allegheny. Allegheny.
Yeah, it's Allegheny. I'm just curious.
Allegheny,
Allegheny
okay.
College or?
Yeah, I mean, the article was straight from Allegheny campus.
And it was written this.
Thank you very much, guys. That was really insightful.
Thanks.
That's exactly what we do. You've intrigued our guests
Okay.
as well as everyone else here.
Nice job.
All right. Jason and Emily? Thank you, guys. Again, just you could stay over here.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be discussing sustainable food systems at Boston College. I'm Jason Jordan, it's my colleague, Emily Griffin. So the main three goals at Boston College for the food sustainability was sourcing food from producers who share their values, which includes integrity, care, and earth stewardship. Continuing a business strategy based on high quality food service that focuses on principles of long-term sustainability, equitable development. And the third one, which is on the next page, is waste reduction. So step one would be composting. So 100% of all kitchen scraps in back of house will be composted, and instituting a compost bin for all students in the main dining hall areas. And these food scraps and other compostable materials will be sent to this company called Save That Stuff, which can be used to produce renewable energy, and create fertilizer pellets. The second method to reduce food waste is utilizing this system called LENPath food waste reduction. Essentially how it works is back of house weighs all food scraps that are being tossed out, and data is entered in the system, LENPath system, which provides strategic adjustments to inventory to adjust waste. So essentially, if too many carrots or corn being tossed out, we can adjust inventory and essentially not throw it away again because we won't buy it. And the remaining leftover food in the dining halls is going to be donated across over 40 nonprofits across Boston, local areas.
And then another aspect of Boston College's sustainable food system is local and sustainable food sourcing. So they're part of the New England Food Vision, which is a vision for the future that 50% of their food is to be sustainably produced in the region by 2060. They also have an initiative called Farm to Table, or Fresh to Table, which is right over here. And what it stands for is fairly trading, regional, sustainable, and healthy. And they basically have like this showcase of food that they get from the area to show students and create awareness to the BC students of how they can get food from the area and make it healthy. And another part of Fresh is that it empowers small farmers in environmentally sound farming practices, ensures fair wages and humane animal welfare practices, and fosters environmental stewardship while protecting biodiversity and soil fertility. And another thing that they highlighted as part of their sustainability practices for food is their community partnerships. And again, we don't know how much they participate with the community within these different groups, but I thought this was like an important part, like because of our conversations in class. And so they partner with these organizations here and try to really get the students involved as much as possible with local food. Yeah.
Yeah, please introduce yourself to everybody. Thank you.
Wonderful. Hi. Professor Christopher Bosso, as said, let me just say great presentations by the students. I have not given a lecture in front of a live bunch of people since March 2020, so I have no idea how to do this anymore. So I'm on sabbatical this year to research, so it's sort of a nice escape. I'm going to spend less time on sustainability today of the food system. Maureen, Timmons will talk a little bit about that. We've been focusing a lot in our thinking for the last years on resilience as opposed to sustainability, and although the two are nested in some respects, or at least they're hopefully not contradictory. So I'm going to focus my remarks primarily for the first 20 minutes on concepts of food system resilience, because we talk a lot about sustainability, And then what happens when there is actually a sort of a disruption system? And then we start thinking about resilience. So, these are concepts that we're going to spend a little time on. So you've done a lot on sustainability this term already. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on resilience. And then Maureen's going to talk a bit about the Northeastern University dining system as in a sense, as a metaphor for the broader food system, both in general, but also since COVID, because we can't not talk about that. And about the challenges of sustainability under conditions when you're worried about other things like safety. So that's sort of the setup here. So I'm a scholar of public policy, and I think a lot about systems in the broad sense, and the policy dynamics. About how do you foster the kinds of outcomes you want? And markets don't always do it, and that's part of my subtext here. So they work really well sometimes, and they don't work really well in other ways, depending on your goals. So let's talk about some questions to consider here. And somebody give me a 2-minute heads up. If you can, thanks, appreciate it. Can you all hear me, by the way? I haven't lectured in a mask either for a long time. So the questions to consider, what are the supply chains that get food to you? One thing that when I teach my course on food systems and public policy, which is a 5,000 level class, and shameless plug, we're offering it in the spring, so purely online. I always start my class by saying, in normal times, for most of us, the American food system or the dominant food system gives most of us, I say most, what we want, when we want it, at a price we want to pay. You think about it, that's our typical, we become to expect a food system that delivers what we want anytime we want it. You want Italian on Monday night, Chinese on Tuesday night, Greek on Wednesday night. You can have it, you want it convenient, you want it tasty, you want it affordable to whatever your price point. Walmart over here, Whole Foods over here. That's what we come to expect. But what happens when it gets disrupted? And so the questions I ask the students to consider is, have you ever thought about the supply chains to get food to you? Before COVID, at least. Did you ever think about where the stores that you shop at get their food? I mean, how does the food get to you? Because we have just become, especially in urban life, where most of us live, we've come to expect that food just shows up. Where it comes from, we don't know. And increasingly, for most of us who don't have any linkages to food production, it just shows up from somewhere. And we ideally want it to be on time, or with our Amazon Prime memberships, we want it to show up, or a Grubhub, or a DoorDash. We want it when we want it. And where it comes from, I'm not quite sure, but it comes from somewhere. But where does it come from? And how does it get to us? Not just the last mile, the DoorDash. How does it get to the actual places that sell us food or prepare us food? And what happens when those supply chains get disrupted? And it's been sort of an interesting experiment over the last year and a half, in a way, which has inconvenienced many of us and done worse for others. That's the point I'm going to make here. So, concerns about food system resilience. Natural disruptions, we are always concerned about natural disruptions. Islands like Puerto Rico, or places like New Orleans after Katrina. Hurricanes are disruptive forces, and they disrupt food systems like every other system because, if you think about it, if you disrupt electrical systems, water systems, you're also going to disrupt food systems or transportation systems. So places like Puerto Rico are particularly vulnerable because they're islands. It's an island. And, effectively, New Orleans was an island with Katrina and more recently Ida. And so, food systems get disrupted like any other system. But COVID-19 also impacted food systems. It impacted food production. Workers in frontline places got sick. It affected supply chains. Because people got sick or because of economic disruptions by COVID, retail workers leaving or leaving their jobs because of concerns about sickness or because they got sick or their families got sick. A lot of disruption occurred in the food system because of COVID as a very natural disaster in a sense about people getting sick. It's also an economic disruption. COVID for most of the food system was less of it was a lot less people getting sick, although there was a bit of that, especially in things like meat production, and more of an economic disruption. The surge, for example, you had a surge in demand for what we call emergency food banks, food pantries, by people suddenly out of jobs. They're living paycheck to paycheck, they're working, but all of a sudden they lost their jobs because they're in sectors like food production, ironically, or it's retail, or hospitality, tourism, education, all these areas that got disrupted by COVID. People suddenly lost their jobs or had less money. Suddenly they're, instead of going to the store and buying food, they're going to the food bank. And all of a sudden you had this massive spike in demand in the emergency food system. How do you get food to that? And so you have that disruption. We also have political disruptions. We don't think about this much, but for example, in Cuba after the Soviet Union collapsed, Cuba was depended a huge amount on the Soviet Union for oil, for other basics. All of a sudden that gets shut off, and Cuba has to remake its entire agricultural sector. After that disruption. And in some respects, what's happening in the United Kingdom right now with Brexit, their decision by the UK to leave the European Union. You're having already seen tremendous disruptions in food systems because they don't have people to drive trucks. They don't have the people to actually process food because of immigration changes, or people are not coming back to work because of COVID. And so you're getting interesting disruptions in food systems, and we're seeing a little bit in the United States, especially in the meat production sector. But the British are seeing a lot of it because, again, the British have pretty much exported out their food production for the last some argue the last century, but really the last 40, 50 years in particular. And the point of all this is that we take food system functions for granted because we have the luxury of doing so until they are in danger, or until they're disrupted. That's sort of what's happened to some extent in this last year and a half. To some extent, for example, how many of you went to the grocery store? In retail, your grocery store, sort of like say a little bit over a year and a half ago, let's say March, April 2020, only to find shortages of things. Yeah, you all did. I mean, of some odd stuff too. And yet what's weird is there was plenty of food around, just was the wrong food chain. A lot of the food that got disrupted was food that goes to institutional food systems, like universities, schools, casinos, believe it or not, cruise ships. That all gets restaurants. That all gets disrupted because no one's going to those places right now. And they're all at home now. They're shopping in their retail grocery stores. But the food system that supplies retail grocery stores and the food systems that supply institutional food suppliers are two different systems oftentimes. So there's plenty of product out there, just in the wrong place, going to the wrong people, because they're all suddenly at home now eating 3 meals a day. And we used to eat 2 or meals a day at school or work, oftentimes, or sometimes all 3 for case of students. So we take food system functions for granted until they get disrupted. So with COVID-19, I think it sort of highlights some of the disruptions that can occur in food systems that we've sort of taken for granted over the years because we, affluent society, and we've become so accustomed to the system we have. I mean, we've in the last 50 years in particular, we've seen tremendous efficiency seeking in the food system by industry. We have food industry consolidation, fewer companies becoming larger and larger in all kinds of sectors. I'll talk a little bit more about that. We have a focus on just-in-time distribution, even down to literally the retail level or even your home level. And these kind of efficiency-seeking functions that happen in markets are great until they don't work. Because these kinds of, the focus on efficiency and consolidation creates vulnerabilities in food systems that can lead to brittleness and sometimes shortages. We'll talk a little bit about that. I mean, again, and I'll make very clear, the impacts of these vulnerabilities will fall disproportionately on those already who are on the margins of society, the poor people. They will feel it the most because they always feel it the most. If you have enough money, you can sort of buy your way out of a problem. But it's usually the people who are already on the margins that feel the greatest impact of disruptions. We see risks in concentrated ownership of processing and retail. As I'll point out, 4 companies process 85% of the meat in the United States, only 4. and 2 of them are owned by foreign companies. So, and that only being owned by a foreign company is not in itself a problem, but some argue that, that especially in the case of one company, it's owned by it's a Chinese-owned company, that the question about where the primary loyalty, if you want to use that term, lies, is a good question. And the other one's owned by a Brazilian firm, and that issue's been raised as well. There's a real concern about that. We never used to think about that as a problem, but now people begin to wonder whether that's a problem. It's not just a US thing, too. This issue's coming up in other countries. So, we have this problem of concentration in ownership of processing and retail, in all kinds of sectors of the food system. And that's not a problem for a lot of people if it gives you greater efficiency and greater savings. It becomes a problem if you get monopolization that then controls price, controls supply, and or if that company that is monopolistic falls apart. Things can happen. So there's concerns about that. It's also a mistaken view that the private food businesses have the resources and the motive to rapidly return to normal operations. That is not always true. I point out here in the graphic that half of the food markets were still closed in New Orleans after Katrina, 2 years later after Katrina. Why? Because frankly, they don't want to bother reopening in these neighborhoods because the neighborhoods were poor, and they weren't going to do it on their own because it wasn't enough money to do it. I mean, they'll reopen the affluent neighborhoods, but not the poor neighborhoods, not without policy, not without support. So, and again, the point I'm trying to make is food system disruptions will vary by, depending who you are, depending where you are. It will vary by neighborhood because of pre-existing differences in food security. If you're already food insecure, food system resilience problems will fall on your shoulders disproportionately. Whether because you're living on an isolated island or because you're living in a poor neighborhood and you're poor yourself. I mean, those are the realities of life in any kind of resilience lens. So concepts of food system resilience. I'm not going to spend too much time on these things. Some people in the audience may have seen these before. A resilient food system is able to recover from the negative shock and return to normal. I use whatever normal, quotation normal operations. In the core, there are 3 basic principles. And if you've ever seen these kind of concepts before, this is nothing new. It's the ability to adapt to changing conditions, the ability to withstand disruptions, and the ability to recover quickly. So what kind of system is that if we apply that lens to a food system? Well, it's flexible. You're not tied to a single truck. You're not tied to a single supply chain. The big Cisco truck pulls up and gives you everything. Not that you pick on it. That you're not reliant on a single supply chain. It's diversity. You're not reliant. You have many different types of suppliers, not just one type. One of the concerns raised over the last year and a half is, the overdependence on large producers, large transportation operations, large processors, large retailers creates brittleness in the system when those operations sort of get stressed. And what are the other kinds of opportunities out there? Local, smaller producers, different diverse kinds of producers or retailers or other kinds of food system players. So it's diverse. It's redundant. Now, this is a problem with sustainability because redundancy takes up resources. So redundancy means there's a backup system in place. That's an ideal world. I mean, in some religious denominations, you are required to keep a certain amount of food stored away in case of emergency. In the case of the Church of Latter-day Saints, a year. That's redundancy, but that's expensive. You need storage capacity, you need money there's a whole point about redundancy that actually in the ideal world happens, but in a systems level thinking, it can be expensive, it could actually take up energy, it could actually be wasteful. You just have to, because if you don't use that food correctly, it could be wasteful. So, and so there's a redundancy factor in resilience that you want to think about. And there's adaptability. It can change quickly to meet new circumstances. And I would argue that although in many respects, and here's the different parts of the food system we think about, I just won't go through it, but again, think about the different portions of any food system: processing, transportation, distribution, retail, questions of food insecurity, food waste, et cetera. There's a lot of different points in the food system where things can go wrong in ways that you haven't thought about. For example, I'll just give you a quick example of Boston. Professor Eckelman's heard this before. Most food comes into Boston by truck. And it comes into Boston by truck via pretty much a couple of roads. And if those roads get disrupted, you've got problems. I-93 going through downtown Boston is always a pinch point. We think about it, if your food all comes into town from somewhere else and it goes through a couple of clogged roads, that's a problem in best of times. If you have 15 inches, if you have 100 inches of snow you had in 2015, it becomes less annoyance and more of a serious threat. You can't get your food into the city. You can't move it around. That's not trivial. So there's a lot of different points in the food system we can talk about. So considerations. The diversity of food production systems in the total food resource framework. How many different types of production systems are available to you? Is it the one big food system of remote companies that you have no idea who they are, you have no control, no interaction with them except to buy their food? Or are there other kinds of production systems? The local farmers market, as examples of so how many different types of food production systems can you tap and are available in a regional sense or a more national sense? Where are they spatially located? What's the spatial distribution of primary food resources? Local, regional, interregional. To be blunt, the food system we have is a marvel of efficiency. If you think about it, if you want your kiwi fruit in February, you can get it. It's not grown in Boston, of course. It's coming from somewhere else, Chile or Italy or somewhere. But it's not coming from Boston. And that's the great thing about a global food system: variety. You get stuff any time of the year. But there's also problems of global chains like that. So you want to think in terms of, okay, what can be done more locally, what can be done more regionally, what can be done more intra-regional, what's transnational, and why? What are the values of each? What are the trade networks and the capacity to trade food that you have to think about? We take that for granted. There used to be, not that long ago, one could argue that prior to the 20th century, a lot of countries expended a lot of their military might protecting their food sources, obtaining and protecting food sources. The British Empire was one big vacuum cleaner for food, produced in the colonies, shipped to the mother country. If you think about it, that's, you don't want to think about military as a defender of food. That was a traditional role for armed forces to protect food. And we don't think about that, but how do you think about food, trade networks and capacity to trade food? And what can make those trade networks brittle? What can break them? Do we have an access to historical understanding related to past experiences of how to produce and access food during shocks to the system? I'm older than anybody in this room, probably in betting. So my mother's still alive, she's 93. She remembers as being a kid during World War II, growing and canning your own food because there were shortages and there was rationing. But that kind of historical understanding about how to survive during periods of disruption is pretty rare, and is not easily handed down from generation to generation, especially in the affluent societies where we don't think about this kind of stuff. And so is there a stored memory of how to adapt under conditions of long-term system disruption? We haven't had to worry about this for the most part, but I think COVID sent a little message to a lot of us in this country and elsewhere that these kinds of things we take for granted, or the food system we take for granted has brittleness to it. So concepts of resilience, I just, how much time do I have? Am I good? Okay, so again, the principles of resilience that we sort of think about, I wrote that little piece, I think it was distributed, about thinking about resilience under COVID. The principles of resilience focus on reducing risk and vulnerability, support multiple food sourcing strategies. They value redundancy in the system, provide wide access to information about sources of food. There's issues of transparency, about knowledge. Not just knowing, it's the classic know your farmer, know your food, but it's even more than that. It's, under what conditions, where does your food come from? Under what conditions is it produced? To what extent do you know about, the food that arrives on your table. And to what extent is all this controlled by market forces or by, to be blunt, corporations as opposed to people? These are real issues that we think about. And to be blunt, such characteristics of resilience go against the conventional norms of efficiency, centralization, and lack of transparency. Good luck trying to figure out what goes on along the food system. It's very difficult because of corporate secrets and because of it. Frankly, they don't want you to know a lot of times their processes for doing things. Meanwhile, the dominant food system, and again, and I'm saying this because I've benefited as much as anybody from the dominant food system, but I worry that we've become so over-reliant on it that the brittleness in that system that we saw a little bit during COVID can really come back at us in a major way at some point in time down the road. We have fewer, larger, and more specialized farms these days than we used to. We have consolidation in food production, not just the United States, elsewhere. The world's largest producer of soybeans is anybody? Brazil. So you're getting whole countries that are specializing in one thing, which is great if the market works efficiently. But what happens if that crop goes through natural disease, through other kinds of threats? So specialization is great. Size, scale, these are all great things from a market perspective, but they do have their costs. We have concentration in food processing, shipment, and retail. As I point out, 4 companies process 85% of the meat in this country. And if you don't think that has effects on the price you pay for meat, it does. There's no competition now, in that sector. And in fact, there's quite clear evidence that in the poultry sector, for example, which 2 companies control poultry processing, that has been price fixing. Because during periods of U.S. government's going after them now because there's clear evidence of price fixing in poultry processing. Globalized commodity markets are, again, tremendously efficient and they work great when they work great. But there's concerns about long chains. I mean, for having concerns about the shipping routes of the world, having concerns about trucking, we're having concerns about clogged ports. The more you rely on distant, far production and long delivery chains, the more that can be disrupted. Now, not everything can be done locally. You know that this is New England. We can't grow tropical food here, nor probably should we try. It'd be too energy inefficient. But we have to think more clearly about what can be done better from local sources, even if it forces us to think about how we change our own diets. And one of the arguments that you sort of have to ask yourself is, how much is our desire for what we want when we want it a driver of this dominant system? Because it will give us what we want. And the whole system in many respects is driven by dominant economic values of efficiency, speed, cost effectiveness, and profit. And those are all fine things, except that at the end of the day, they don't have resilience in mind for the most part, because that costs money. That's not, and that's a difficult concept, to get into a market system. Give you a quick example. This is a little bit old, this map, but nothing's changed. So we are in Little New England. Anybody from outside the country sort of identify where we are? Yeah. A little teeny tiny place way up there in the corner, right? Now, those large circles there are meat processing, beef and hogs. Notice how little of it happens in this region. So if you're a meat eater, most of the meat you eat is being processed far away. Why is it being processed in places like Iowa and Kansas? Because that's where the corn and soybeans are. And that's what we've done over the last 50 years in particular. We've moved all processing of animals to where the food is, because it's cheaper and more efficient. That's all good things. But if you're living in New England and all your food is being shipped to New England from far away, that creates concerns. Now you might say, well, I'm not a meat eater. Why do I care? Insert your favorite thing here. Fruits and vegetables. Unless you like cabbage, broccoli, you're going to be eating. The point is that we become accustomed to this without realizing so much of what we eat is produced somewhere else and shipped far to us from far away. So again, overarching thoughts. Fostering food system resilience requires rebuilding close connections between consumers and their food systems. Again, it's sort of like, even if you're at a large urban university, and Maureen Timmons will talk a little bit more about this, I'd ask questions like, where does your food come from? Now even Maureen doesn't know necessarily all the time, but she asked that question. She asked that question a lot. But I think what we need to do is foster greater transparency and insights into the food system that enable us as consumers to know more about where our food comes from and how it gets to us. Growing concerns about the effects of climate change on the food system resilience. A lot of our most productive farming areas are under tremendous stress from climate change. The Imperial Valley of California, for example. Loss of water, rising heat. You don't think that's going to have huge effects on your food, access, quality, cost in the years to come? It will. So we have to think about the issues of climate change on lots of the food system. And remember, climate change is not it's not just a question about do we have to get better air conditioners for our homes. It's like, what's going to happen to our food? I would argue that's a little more proximate issue. And then finally, resilience is not easily fostered by markets. The market left to its own device favors efficiency and profit. So, resilience is a matter of conscious policy. How are we going to build it into the system? Even if it's more, it as a result makes the system a little bit more expensive. But again, the question is for who? And how do you build more equity into that food system at the same time? So I'll leave it at that for the time being. So this is that same slide.
Oh, yeah.
So you want to do that there, or you want to go to yours?
Hi, everybody. So this is a repeat slide intentionally because I just want you to kind of keep track of these things as I talk about dining. Start again. So Maureen Timmons, Director of Dining Services here at Northeastern. Been here about 20 years. So I've seen all sorts of crazy things here at Northeastern. Also a Northeastern alum, proud Northeastern alum. So yes, just keeping. I actually repeated this slide on purpose just because I think it's got some great things to think about, to consider as we hear more about dining. So I always like to start with this slide, and some students look shocked and some are just like, oh, really? 27 dining locations. We serve normally 20,000 a day. I would say this year it's definitely more than that. And in dining, we actually get to engage with students, particularly first and second year, probably at least 3 times a day. So dining sees students often more than Professor Bosso. I always say that he goes, I see them, perhaps once or twice a week for X amount of time. And I'm like, oh, we get the opportunity to see them all the time, which is wonderful for us. And this is just a map of all the locations. You see the little sort of turquoise, those are our new food lockers, which you may see there's some downstairs here. And as Professor Bosso said, we, as much as I'm going to talk a lot more probably about your resilience and sustainability just because of the last 18 months and what that's had an impact, but we do have a pretty robust green plan. This is the newest one. It's about 40 slides, and we've had it for probably 20 years. So this isn't something, sustainability is not new here. And for those of you that did the presentation on Boston College, Beth Emery, who was the director, they're a good friend of mine. They have a great program. And I thought you might find it interesting to know that the woman that was in charge of sustainability was Julie Stelmazik, who is a Northeastern alum. She just recently went down to Rhode Island. So I'll give her a shout out that you all were shouting out her program. So very nice. So green plan wise, so, Chris and I were talking about is sustainability kind of and resilience kind of in conflict with each other. And I would say during the past 18 months, sustainability was not the first lens. I mean, normally it's a lens we're always looking through. It's one of our lenses. It's sustainability, safety. During COVID, we didn't have the luxury sometimes of thinking that as our first lens because we had to worry about the supply chain and safety and making sure we had enough food in a different format for students. But we just as some examples. So one example that we've been doing is Red's Best is the name of a local fish company. And we've been working with them for about 7 years. So that's something that continued throughout. We're still doing it now where the fishermen can go out and catch whatever. It's called a bycatch. And then they bring it to us and we pay X amount per pound. So that way the fishermen, no matter what they catch, the universities, it's not just Northeastern, I think Boston College also participates, Harvard, maybe Tufts as well. And we've been buying that for years. So that's something that there's a lot of things that have continued throughout COVID. It's not like we said, oh, sustainability, we're just going to take an 18-month break. It was more like, it was kind of this instead of, a big solid projection forward. So just, I think that's important to know, because I think it seems like some people say it had to be either or, and I would say it was more of a yes and, but just to varying degrees. And feel free also to, we have the green plan on the nudining.com website if you want to see the entire plan yourself. And if you have questions, feel free to follow up with me. We're just about to put up the new one. We're just waiting for one more number, and we'll put up the new one for you shortly. So this is another lens that we've been looking through. These are the menus of change principles. If you've been in the dining halls, you've probably seen them. 24 principles created by the Harvard School of Public Health and the Culinary Institute of America, otherwise known as the CIA. And these are for healthy, sustainable, and delicious food. So we in dining have been working with these all through the dining halls and retail dining since 2015, specifically with this lens. Professor Bosso and I are both very involved with a group that I'll tell you about next called the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative, which is set other universities to try to amplify these principles. So you'll see that, and their sustainability is woven through almost every single one of the principles, we've been focusing on these throughout the COVID and up to the state, but I would say there was varying degrees of pressure to sort of amplify these during that time because of competing priorities. This is a list of the other prestigious universities like Northeastern that were invited to be part of the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative. And you'll notice that we have some ex officio members. Google's very involved with this. They use the principles at Google as well. LinkedIn is a newer member. I don't even think they've made it on the list yet here. But it's wonderful to have. I mean, it's a brilliant idea for CIA and Harvard School of Public Health to think about having universities sort of amplify these. I mean, it's a brilliant place to do that. The MCRC is run by Stanford and CIA. So we get to collaborate with the colleagues at Stanford quite a bit on this, which is wonderful. There's a lot more information about, if you're interested about Menus of Change or MCRC online, if you want to hear it, there's tons more information about those. Professor Bosso and Professor Wang from UCLA also did a really great research project in the middle of COVID to just kind of take the temperature of where we in dining were, see how the pandemic was impacting our operations. And I would say for us here at Northeastern, I participated in the survey. The glove use, we already had mandatory glove use, so that wasn't a change for us here. But prepackaged foods, so we went from, in March, we went from having 27 locations to open to all of a sudden closing 27 locations, which has never happened in the history of Northeastern. And just imagine how much food. We probably usually have about 3 days worth of food here. So everything open, everything closed. And we had to go around and figure out what can we donate, what can we save, what has been spoiled. So it was a very, and plus a lot of staff had to go immediately. So it was a super challenging time, I would say. We used a ton of prepackaged food, a lot of single-use silverware and containers. This was another challenge at this time. And at one point, we were having so much challenge getting packaging because everybody was doing takeout. So everyone's having the same challenges that we actually thought we were going to have styrofoam, which we've not had here in, I don't even know how long. And so we were very concerned that we were going to have styrofoam back on campus, which we were resisting to the nth degree. In the end, they had to send, we got a full 18-wheeler from, I think it was Colorado, delivered here with packaging in it that had to go to the warehouse because we wouldn't have had anywhere to store that. So that's just one example of the craziness that was going on during the pandemic. We always say to each other, we're like, no one has a roadmap for the pandemic. This was our first one. So every day was really a brand new experiential learning opportunity. I think I'll go with that. Yes, it was my co-op job. And then, another note was how did it impact sustainability goals? And you could see most of them had a major impact, some impact. I would be interested to talk to people that had no impact because I would be interested to see how that was possible. But I think most people had, I would say here we definitely had between some and major, because we were able to sustain quite a bit, but there was definitely an impact, 100%. Interestingly enough, so all the food service at Northeastern is contracted, meaning that we don't operate ourselves. I'm the only person at the university. I work for Northeastern. I oversee all the contractors. So it's about 10 different contractors. Chartwell's is our primary contractor. So they would do all the resident hall feeding, most of the stuff at Curry. They have about 22 of the 27 locations. So Compass Group is the parent company of Chartwell's. They're the largest food service company in the world. And Food Buy is an arm of the company that's in charge of procurement, and they're the largest procurement company in North America. So even with those two largest, there have definitely been supply chain issues, and we have, imagine the resources that they have and we have through them. So just know when people, a lot of times, you have, like Chris said, you haven't seen the supply chain, if you haven't felt it maybe a little bit in the grocery store, but imagine what happens on a scale of feeding 20,000 people a day. All of a sudden something isn't there. It's like, we're not getting that today. And we say, what do you mean it's not coming in today? So that's, I mean, it's just interesting that it can happen small, large, with the largest groups in the world. So these are just, I'm going to tell you a little bit, some of the stories that we kind of deal with. I was showing Professor Bosso earlier today, I got a note from Chartwell's. They were talking about, one of their major suppliers having trouble getting here. No longer can they do next day orders. They used to be able to order, say, early on today to get it tomorrow because we're so big. They literally come in with a tractor trailer load of food. And we have very little storage on campus, so it comes in fresh every day. We have multiple orders coming all day long at all the locations around campus. And also, kitchen equipment is another thing that we did some renovations this summer. And typically, if we would order something, say in April, May, we would have it July. We knew there were obviously going to be issues this summer, so we ordered in probably April, May. We have some equipment that's still not here. We had to actually rent equipment. We couldn't even get it here in the Boston area. We had to rent it from Chicago to get it here so we could get it in place to get a Board of Health inspection. So we've had all sorts of crazy experiences pretty much daily, sometimes hourly. Food all the time. I mean, say Starbucks is an example. They might normally come on a Monday and they might say, just get a note, hey, we're not coming today. Okay. They haven't had green tea in a very long time. We have 3 vendors. We just have one open. We have 3 vendors that would typically have been open in September, no issues. One's having major labor shortages. The other one is having equipment shortages. Often, they have they switched coffee companies and they couldn't get the new equipment to go with that. So these things are holding, which would never, in the history of Northeastern, to the best of my knowledge, that has never, ever happened before. So we are running into that stuff daily, I would say. Also, there's a coin shortage. So Chartwell's, if they go to order coins for like the Curry Center, they can't, if they say we need $1,000 worth of coins, they go, okay, we'll give you 200. So this is on, like, of all things, like coin shortage on top of all this, the other stuff. And then labor shortage. This has been, Chartwell's is doing okay now labor-wise. There are some of the other vendors on campus are having, probably noticed that Tate is only open for the first shift. Usually they would be open from like 8 to say at least 9 at night, something like that. Now they're just open 8 to 4 because they can only get that number of staff. The trucking's a huge issue. Often the people will call and say, we have the food, we just can't bring it to you because there are no drivers. And sometimes if it's someone local, we have trucks here, so we can send team out to get the food if it's close by. But often it's, as Professor Bosso said, it's not close by and we can't send people, but that is also a daily issue. Manufacturing, I mentioned the food lockers earlier. We had them, we ordered them again, probably back in April, May. And they were supposed to be here mid-July, and they were in New Jersey in mid-July, but they didn't have the chip that needed to go in them. So we kept waiting for the chip. They couldn't even give us a date of when the chip would arrive. August, I don't know, September, maybe. So it's very, which is highly unusual. We've never sort of had that. We usually would say, okay, when's it going to or delivered? We could plan and all the things around it. So this has just been crazy challenging. Transportation, storage. For us, some places might be able to have the extra storage around to be able to sort of say, oh, we can put it over there where we need it. Particularly one example might be Coca-Cola. So for a while, Coca-Cola didn't have any 20-ounce water bottles, which is, again, highly unusual. They were missing the cap. So they had the bottle, but they didn't have the cap to put on. So they told us we could get it anywhere we wanted, which is, again, highly unusual for a beverage company to say, we don't have it, you can just get it anywhere. So these are things that are just a daily occurrence, I would say, at this point. And safety, one of the things that were early on in the pandemic, we didn't have as much information as we have now. So we had the staff were here, and then they went home for a bit, and then they came back. And when they came back, it was extra cleaning. We had to change a lot of from self-service to served, so more staffing. People had to be tested, I think it was twice a week at that time. We went to a lot of prepackaged things. So whereas we hadn't thought about that kind of all that thing, and then people, if anyone were to get COVID, it could wipe out. At one point in time, Stetson West had to close down, or Stetson East had closed down for, I think it was a week, because one of the managers was sick, and it wiped out the entire. So, how do you plan for that? Oh, we just lost a whole dining hall. Okay, now what? So I think a lot of the things that we've been dealing with, it's sort of a live fire exercise on resilience. But as much as this might look a little daunting, the team, we have a really strong team. They've been here for a long time, and they've used to dealing with things like giant snowstorms, where often you can't get the food to campus. Staff would have to stay over down at the hotels and walk to campus because it was whether the tea was running or something like that. Or during the Boston bombing, when we had to shelter in place, we still had to figure out how to feed the whole campus. So the team has gone through some of those pretty challenging experiences. So I must say COVID was a little more difficult than all those in the past, but it's also made the team stronger, I would say, for sure. And I want to let you know, there's also been a ton of, we've learned a lot. So experiential learning pretty much every single day. And, it's when you have those kind of constraints on whether it's safety, security, supply chain, a lot of innovation, a lot of creativity. We have to say, like, okay, where can we get that? Who can we get it from? Where can we store it? What can we use this as a substitute? Agility is something, it's a daily, if not hourly occurrence, because there's a lot of other things happening as well. A little bit larger class coming in this year. Adaptability, all the things that Professor Bosso mentioned about, in the previous slide. That's something, you have to be able to, we have to be able to do that every single day. And we've been, through MCRC, we think of dining as a living lab, and we've really been using it sort of what works, what doesn't work. Last year, we had the dining halls as takeout only, which was, we had to do it. We had no choice because students couldn't come into the dining hall for a period of time. And then it was 6 feet apart, and we didn't have enough seating. So this year we have, the rules are a bit different. So luckily we can have the students back in the residence halls and start to build that community again. What we've thought a lot about too is using food as an educator, and how can we educate students through food, which we always sort of are thinking about that. But it's as much as it's been challenging, we've also had a ton of opportunity, and we've learned a lot, that's for sure. We're kind of ready for anything. I don't want to say ready for anything, but hopefully we won't have any more big tests in the near future. And then these are just some thoughts that we had at the end. If you want to go on. Okay, so what about like safety versus sustainability? Right now, safety is definitely high on the list of priorities still. Are they in competition during the pandemic? For us, they have been at different times. I think we're finding more of a balance now than we did at different times. And this is a question, if sustainability commitments fall apart during a health crisis, are campus sustainability initiatives themselves sustainable? Which is a question. And I think, just speaking for dining, I think ours haven't fallen apart. Have they been challenged at different times? And are they maybe not the top priority? Absolutely. But they're all still there. It was actually a good exercise for us to go through and update the green plan just to see like kind of where are we with all the things that we said we were going to do, like composting has been consistent, and root to tip cooking, and looking at our chefs going into the kitchens and looking in the compost and saying like what's in there that we could make something about, like a kale stem pesto is an example of something that we just kept seeing all these kale stems. We thought, what can we make of that? So we've been making kale stem pesto as an example of that. So I think it's hopeful still for sure. And I think sustainability will go back to becoming a bigger priority. I think just right now it's kind of in between. So. Thank you.
forecasting, just all the ups and downs for everything, right? Anybody have any questions or thoughts, concerns? I mean, I have a question, I guess, with just kind of related to sustainability side. What were some things, surprises you had that were able to keep going with sustainability, or things that you couldn't actually keep doing through COVID, like things you hadn't thought about how COVID really affected the kind of sustainability operations side of things?
I think one of the things I mentioned was the Red's Best, being able to keep buying that fresh local fish throughout, instead of just saying like, oh, we've got to stop. You have to be very mindful, and you have to be very intentional about doing that and making it a priority. So we were able to keep that going. And I think that the packaging was the challenge, because we typically had compostable packaging, and then at one point you were getting anything because you needed it. You had to kind of take what they had available, which was very limited at different times. So.
How about anything with the fruit and vegetable side, or was that just the kind of just same idea as all just kind of all over the place?
I don't recall that those being like the challenging. It would be more like, I'm trying to think of like things like almost with the brand where they said, oh, like Kigo is an example. It's a concept over at Curry, and the bowls, they can't get the bowls in right now. So all of a sudden, instead of having the branded bowl, and that happens with Starbucks, like they're missing certain cups. So they also think we don't have any 12-ounce cups. Like, well, we still have to do 12-ounce drinks. So you have to figure out like quickly where to get another cup. So I think it's more like, it seems more like packaging heavy or very specific items, like the Coke,
Yeah,
the water bottles, things like that.
It did have an impact, though, I think you recall, chatted about this on local purchasing.
Yeah.
The ability to purchase some goods. I mean, people don't appreciate just how large institutional dining is when, as Maureen will tell you that, students, people say, well, why don't you buy more local X? And the issue is that sometimes local producers can't scale up sufficient size to be able to supply an operation as big as Northeastern. And so how did that affect, how did COVID affect your ability to buy local?
I think just with that, a lot of times they were struggling too, whether it's that they couldn't get, because we use aggregators, you all know what aggregators are. So instead of going to Farmer Bob and Farmer Jill and Farmer Susie, we would have to go to an aggregator, and they would go out to all the farmers because we don't have time to do all that. And often each one individually couldn't supply what we need. So I would say we probably didn't use as many aggregators during that time just because they were struggling, whether it was with drivers or staffing or things like that. So we work with Farm Fresh Rhode Island and Forager right now. So we try to, that's our way to kind of get to the smaller farmers and bring them into the university to have someone else help us do that, because it's incredibly time consuming.
have you noticed it kind of coming back online now? Things are kind of getting back to,
Yeah. It's definitely getting better.
Are there anything online or?
I would say.
Sorry, the question was, what was composting like during COVID?
Yeah, so I would say so we would say the kitchen, back of house, and the dining room, front of house. I would say in the front of the house, a lot of students, because we had so much more packaging. So I would say it was much more challenging. And a lot of students were taking things with them. So, which means it likely wasn't getting composted because outside the dining halls it's not easy to compost. So I would say it was consistent in the kitchens because they're just used to doing that. Wouldn't have been anything different on the back of the house side. But I would say on the front of the house, it was definitely probably nowhere near what it normally would be.
Just curious, did you notice that students wanted to eat different things? Was there a different balance of types of food you could supply?
Yes.
The question was, did students change their eating habits through COVID?
Absolutely. It was interesting because we were trying to, thinking of, we want to make sure they have lots of healthy food. And, we were thinking, a lot of the menus have changed stuff very plant forward. And at that time, I think people were very nervous and concerned. And it ended up being comfort food that was actually providing a lot of comfort. We had a lot more comfort food, I would say, during that time, just because we could just see, the level of stress just with not knowing what was happening and if people were here taking classes online and coming in. So I think the comfort food quotient went way up.
The mac and cheese meter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was. We all saw it in our households too.
Yeah.
More pizzas in 1 year than I've had in the previous 10.
So I think some things we do is to do little breakout sessions to help just to give them a topic to have them talk, and then we kind of come back and have a further conversation. Anything you guys were interested in? I have a question, but I think you think them to
Go for it.
Well, one thing I think was thinking about is how this COVID and everything, how it affected you and like, as we were saying with like some of that food, but how it affected you and how you eat, also how you kind of relate, think about what the university should or shouldn't be doing around food. Did it change some of the way you think what the university should be doing, or did you just kind of, how has the past year kind of altered some of that? So talk to some people around you. You have a, 4 or 5, 3 or 4 people per group. Just introduce yourselves, and then we'll come back and continue the conversation. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Good.
Why don't we start with, are they still going? Or- I know, once you do that. All right, we'll, ask them, you know, for their feedback. All right, thanks, everybody. Let's come back. So we got how many, 3 groups? 3? All right. Just, we guys in the back want to share anything, you guys are insights or things you're talking about? Relative to this class or?
We kind of talked about how we can shift our university systems to be more local. And I guess that could also apply to we're wondering, being in Boston with a long harsh winter, how we would keep our food system local during like over the winter. Are there any projections for keeping that system open, reliant on the urban farming? How we keep up local food?
Just, should I start?
Yes, please.
Just depends on what you want to eat.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you could have I mean, remember, once upon a time, you ate local because you had no choice. So, you know, there's a reason why regional cuisines evolved the way they did. You know, Maureen will tell you more because she's got a background in this, but there's a reason why New England cooking relied a lot on cabbages and root vegetables and pickles and stuff like that, because that's what you survived on during the winter times. You know, yeah, you could have a much more localized food system. You have to change how you eat. And that's the point. We really, you know, if we become so accustomed to, again, to what we want when we want it, that in the last, you know, couple of generations, we've lost a lot of that seasonality in our cooking that our forebears, you know, there's a reason why my mother, my grandmother would put up all kinds of stuff in the fall, you know, canning and preserving for the winter, because that's what you did. But yeah, you could do more local. You just have to change how you eat. Now, having said that, and Maureen can sort of test this from the institutional perspective, you know, there are just some things we don't produce enough at all. For example, New England doesn't, you know, once upon a time, New England was actually a wheat producing area. That's not true anymore. We just cannot produce grains, you know, at that level to feed a population. Even if you're just talking about wheat for bread, it's just not sufficiently large enough to do that. So you have to figure out what you're good at in the region, focus on that, and then figure out again, this notion of local, regional, interregional. But, you know, I think that's, you know, so you try to incentivize much more local production of what the local is good at, you know, and then think about other, I mean, you wouldn't want to try to, you know, massively increase meat production in the region. You just don't have the grain or the space. But, you know, what can New England do more of? And as people study this, what can we do more in New England to feed a regional population? But again, it requires also on the consumption side that we alter slightly how we actually eat. And from an institutional standpoint,
I wish it were easier because we would love that too. We do change our menus seasonally. So in the fall, you'll notice if you'll see more squash and things that are local that we can get local. When the farmers have the most products for us, most of you are not here in the summer. So they're like, oh, look what we have in the summer. Like, oh, great. We don't have as many students as we have in spring and fall. So there's always that challenge. So when they have more abundance, we have less students. When they have less abundance, we have more students. So it's a little harder than it seems. And we wish it were easy. I mean, we would love nothing more to say, here's the whole list, and we'd love to get everything local. That would be our dream as well, because we're all food people. So we want to eat as locally as possible,
and especially if you want fresh,
yeah,
as opposed to frozen or canned. I mean, that's the difference. I mean, you could take that harvest from August, you know, process it if you could figure out where to store it and process it.
Yeah.
But again, it depends also how much you want. We become accustomed to fresh all the time, and you can do some stuff fresh, like hydroponic lettuce, that kind of stuff. But again, that's, you know, there's a space and energy issue, obviously, in hydroponics. You know, so yeah, it's a real trade-off, set of trade-offs, and it's difficult. Yeah. But yeah, I know the dining system has done a lot of effort to try to do more local. But then there's the scale part that you talked about too. Nothing online? Come on, people online.
What were you guys talking about?
We talk a lot about like trying the grocery store site thing, and none of us were like were served during the pandemic really, so we were not all of it ourselves. With how that.
Yeah, we all just kind of like share our personal experiences.
So you're talking mostly about how affected your your shopping habits while you're at home?
Yes.
Yeah.
What did you eat during that time?
Well, I'm from New Jersey, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
Regional grocery store. When I went, everything would be, and it's very, very over, but there was basically just steak left. And like, I was with my family and we used to be in my position to buy steak, but I was thinking when you were speaking about which are going to be impacted by this, people that went in there and couldn't afford that, they would obviously not, I don't know what was done during that time. And I was very grateful that I was able to purchase what I wanted.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, the initial couple, point about all of you at home you're all at home suddenly. And all of a sudden everybody's at the store buying food and, this wave of people who are getting food at school or at work now are suddenly at the grocery store and all of a sudden it's just, and it wasn't so much the hoarding. It really was the fact there were just a lot more people suddenly shopping at home for 3 meals a day that they wouldn't have been doing before. And that's what created that sort of, that wave through it. And you're right, it affected some people differently. I mean, obviously, if you had the economic means, you got, I was able to sort of, basically contact my local, farmer in central Massachusetts that has a meat production, doesn't the local meat, get it, they deliver it. But I was able to do that. I was fortunate to be able to pivot and get local delivery of stuff that a lot of people were willing to do suddenly because they couldn't supply in restaurants and things. But again, I had the means to do that. And for a lot of lower income people, meat especially became something very, very scarce suddenly for a lot of people. Yeah.
So I spent the core of the pandemic in the Dominican Republic, and I think it's interesting how the organization works. So we couldn't export limes or mangoes, so we had like our supermarkets were like filled with like local fruits, and like everyone was motivating others to eat the local foods that would go to waste. And also like if people really like an American cereal, they would buy like 5 of them because they didn't know what would be the next step.
Yeah. Yeah, it sort of played out differently in different places depending on what you produce locally or where you're dependent. Yeah. I heard that from other students who are living in some of the various islands, how it played out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think it's very interesting that a lot of people like on social media and stuff are like talking like how during the pandemic a lot of people like gained weight because they were at home, and then like tying that in to you saying like there was an increase in comfort food, and also just like how everyone's been saying we were in the house like all the time. So just like even my mom, like she was buying way more groceries than she usually would have, and just also like kind of the panic of like, okay, what if there is not going to be this or all that? Because we were like thinking March, we were living in, now looking back at it, but like when we were in March, we had no idea what was happening.
Sure.
And then just thinking about like all that, and, like how that ties together, and like how that impacted like people's eating patterns and stress and all of that, and how that impacted the system on at large was very interesting to me. And also that we talked about how like in dining halls, just like I think eating also then changed when we were transitioning, because like now to me, like sitting and eating somewhere just feels weird. And I'm very much like the lack of on-the-go options, and I struggled with that because especially as like in my fourth and fifth year compared to my first year, like I'm much more busy. So it's like kind of having the takeout option last year, I didn't realize how easy it made stuff. And then this year I could really feel how like the lack of that like made it a bit more difficult.
Those are food lockers. Those are great observations, and thank you for sharing that. I think one of the big things I didn't share before is that in the beginning, like you said, we didn't know what was going to happen, right? So we actually purchased thousands of MREs, meals ready to eat, that you might use in the Army, I guess.
Yeah.
Just because we didn't know, like at that point, are we going to run out of food? How many students will be on campus? How many do we have to feed for how many days? So we were actually thinking like that, like, okay, we're still responsible for feeding people. So what do we have to do is sort of. So I think that was, and then it was interesting, like you say, the takeout, and we find that even this year, I've had students write to me and say, I don't feel comfortable going in the diet home. So students, even last year, there was a spectrum, like, and as most people, some people feel very comfortable, some people are less comfortable. So there's people, everybody in between, and we're seeing that this year as well. What we did last year, unfortunately, isn't sustainable this year because of the volume and needing to have people come in and sit. But it was like last year we had to kind of do what we had to do to kind of get through that period of time to try to support students as we could with what we had with all the guidelines. So every day we were like, what does the CDC say? What does the City of Boston say? What does Northeastern say? Okay, are we following all of those rules? And so it was, every day was, even still now, there's, we're kind of always, it's been a little bit with everybody being vaccinated and testing now, it's a little more settled on campus as far as that. And we know the more, which is calming, but yeah, we realized when we were serving the food originally, we were trying to do like healthy and and we want to make sure, things are as fresh as could be, because it's, packaged food to go after a while, no matter what you do, people get sick of it. You're like, I'm sick of having something in a container. I want to sit down with some silverware and plate. And we couldn't do that last year. So, but we realized quickly, students were like, can you just give us the comfort food? Like we want lasagna, we want macaroni and cheese, we want, like that kind of like comfort food. And everyone has a different, for me, it's ramen, but I'm just saying everyone has a different comfort food. We had to really rethink our menus. We actually changed them all based on the student feedback. So definitely we're probably a little more back to normal now, because we haven't been getting that feedback from students this year yet. Thank you for sharing.
I think an interesting sort of thought experiment will be, not thought experiment, so much be, if I could check with you folks in like 3 to 4 years and see what changed in your own thinking about food, how you acquire it, how you eat it, how you prepare it. It'd be interesting to see whether COVID affected, especially your generation, in how you approached food in the specific sense, in the broader food system question, in the broader sense of it. Do you have more food at home than you used to? Are you more thoughtful about, what will change? Because again, especially in affluent societies, we became really accustomed to, again, the app, it gets delivered. I wonder if that's going to change anything. I'll be interested to see. I don't have an answer. I'll just be interested to see.
Thank you both for coming. This was a lovely.
Great, thanks. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yep.
Logistical things. So next week we have waste. We have Sheila Puffer, professor over at DMSB, and Sue Higgins, who's the assistant director for waste management here on campus, and they'll have a lot to talk about. Even more stuff going on with COVID and all the things that we're planning on doing. So look out for you folks who are doing presentations next week. We had our second tour this morning. That went pretty well. We have a couple more coming up next few weeks, so let us know if you have any questions about that. Also, we have the final assignment, the white paper. We'll be giving out some more instructions on that this week coming forward, but it's definitely pretty open, and we want to kind of, a basic idea is a topic you kind of learned today here, thinking about, what we could do a little bit more on campus here at Northeastern, and trying to explore what explore what you can do, but also thinking about some of the limitations and barriers to getting done. So thank you all, and we'll have a good night.